The small town of Ashfield was the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. Birds sang louder than traffic, and the mornings smelled of dew and wet soil instead of gasoline and smoke. For most, it was just another quiet countryside town, but for Cole, it was a sanctuary. After years of covert operations, secret missions, and nights haunted by gunfire and loss, he had finally found silence. He lived with his elderly parents in an old farmhouse on the edge of town, surrounded by fields and the hum of cicadas. To the locals, he was simply Mr. Cole, the quiet mechanic who could fix anything with wheels. They didn't know that the same hands that repaired their cars had once built weapons, defused bombs, and carried fallen brothers off battlefields. Every morning, Cole would wake before sunrise, brew strong coffee, and step onto the porch, breathing in the clean air as if trying to wash away the ghosts of his past. His father, a retired teacher, often sat beside him, talking about crops, neighbors, and simple things, the kind of talk that made the world feel normal again. His mother would call them in for breakfast, her smile softening the years etched into his face. For a while, life felt almost whole. He spent his days repairing trucks, tending the small garden, and helping elderly neighbors who couldn't lift heavy things. At night, he would read by the fireplace, pretending that the quiet was permanent. Yet deep inside, the soldier in him never truly slept. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain he'd heard footsteps or gunfire. Other times his hands would tremble when thunder rolled, his mind flashing back to faraway deserts and cities where peace was just a myth. Still, he tried to push it away. The townspeople admired his calmness, his quiet voice, his patience, his steady way of moving. But what they didn't see was how tightly he held that calm, how much effort it took to bury the instincts that once kept him alive. Cole had promised himself he would never go back to that life, never again pick up a weapon, never again let violence define him. He believed he could keep that promise. Every sunset over the golden fields convinced him that peace was possible, that maybe he deserved it. But peace built on denial is fragile. And though Cole couldn't know it yet, far beyond the quiet hills, trouble was already moving his way. The past he had buried so carefully was about to come knocking, not with a warning, but with fire. And when it did, the peaceful man the town knew would have to face the soldier he had tried so hard to forget. The trouble started quietly, like a shadow creeping across the edge of a peaceful day. Cole's father, a retired teacher with a kind heart and too much trust in people, had been helping a new community fund that promised to support struggling families in town. The men behind it spoke politely, dressed well, and claimed to be doing good. They even came by the house a few times, shaking hands and calling him sir. He had no reason to suspect anything wrong. After all, he had spent a lifetime believing in the best of people. But behind those smiles hid something dark. The so-called charity was nothing more than a front for a small but ruthless Mafia family that had begun spreading its influence into quiet towns like Ashfield, using generosity as a weapon. When the old man realized where the money was going and refused to be part of their scheme, the kindness vanished. The calls became colder, the visits stopped, and in their place came silence, the kind that warned of danger. Cole knew nothing about it at first. His father didn't want to worry him. "It's just a misunderstanding," the old man said whenever the subject came up. But one morning, as Cole stepped out to fetch the mail, he found an envelope on the porch. No name, no return address, just a folded note with blocky handwriting that looked almost carved into the paper. It read, "Pay, or pay the price." The words were simple, but they carried a chill that sank deep into his bones. Cole stared at them for a long moment, his pulse steady, but his breath slowing, a habit from another life. He tried to dismiss it, convincing himself it was nothing more than a cheap scare tactic. Some punk trying to shake down old folks for cash. But something about the handwriting, the phrasing, the precision, it didn't feel random. It felt professional. When he showed it to his father, the old man laughed it off nervously, but his hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, the note on the table beside him, watching the road that led to their house. Every sound, a creak, a car in the distance, a dog barking, made him listen harder. His instincts, the ones he had spent years suppressing, began to rise like ghosts from the past. He told himself he was overreacting, that this was just paranoia from his old life creeping back in. But as the hours stretched on, the wind rattling the porch swing, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong. The quiet town he thought was safe suddenly felt too exposed, too fragile. And for the first time in years, the peace he had built began to feel like an illusion. For a while, it almost felt like nothing had happened. The threatening note was tucked away in a drawer, and life in the small farmhouse returned to its gentle rhythm. The mornings smelled of coffee and warm bread, and Cole's mother filled the kitchen with soft humming as she cooked. Cole worked in the garage, fixing the old pickup truck with his father, pretending everything was fine. He told himself that the message had been an empty threat, that whoever sent it had moved on. But beneath his calm smile, something inside him stayed alert, restless. At night, he would glance out the window before locking the doors, scanning the fields and the dirt road that stretched toward the horizon. He said nothing to his parents, not wanting to scare them, but he knew that kind of fear never really left a man who'd seen war. It lingered like a faint echo, waiting for the right moment to rise. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Cole was driving home from town with a few groceries in the passenger seat. The road was quiet, only the sound of gravel crunching under his tires and the low hum of the engine. But then he noticed it. A black sedan parked near the old oak tree, just beyond their property line. It wasn't a car, he recognized. Its windows were tinted, its engine off, and yet, in the fading light, he could see the faint gleam of something metallic inside, the unmistakable outline of a gun resting on the dashboard. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, though his expression didn't change. He drove past slowly, pretending not to notice, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then, as he turned into the driveway, the car's headlights blinked once, like a warning. Cole unloaded the groceries in silence, his mind running through possibilities. Could it be a coincidence? A traveler? A hunter? Every answer he came up with felt like a lie. His instincts, the ones he had buried so deep, began to stir, sharp and alive. He checked the locks on every door, scanned the shadows, and walked the perimeter of the property with a flashlight. Everything looked normal, but the stillness in the air felt wrong, heavy. Even the crickets seemed quieter that night. When his mother asked if he was all right, he forced a smile. "Just tired," he said. But as he lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. The memory of that black car burned in his mind, along with the reflection of that weapon and the thought that someone out there was watching. The man he had tried so hard to bury, the soldier, was waking up again, and as much as he wanted peace, Cole knew one truth better than anyone. When the world goes quiet right before a storm, it's never by accident. Something was coming. The night began like any other, calm, quiet, and full of that fragile peace Cole had been clinging to. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and soil. His parents had gone to bed early, and Cole sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the distant hills under the silver glow of the moon. Everything seemed still, almost too still. Then, a sound broke through the silence, a faint crack, like wood snapping. At first he thought it was the wind, but then came another sound, sharper this time, the unmistakable noise of a door being forced open. His instincts flared instantly. The mug fell from his hand as he bolted toward the house, his body moving before his mind could catch up. Shouts echoed inside, angry, panicked voices. Then a single gunshot split the night. The sound froze him for half a heartbeat, then sent him sprinting faster than he ever had before. He reached the porch just as flames licked up the side of the house. The old wood crackled beneath his boots as he kicked the door open, the heat punching against his skin. Inside, smoke filled every corner, thick and choking. He called out for his parents, coughing as he stumbled through the living room. But there was no answer, only the roar of fire and the collapsing ceiling. When he saw the overturned furniture and broken glass, rage and disbelief hit him at once. He forced his way toward the kitchen, but the fire was too strong, swallowing everything in its path. The world around him blurred, the smell of burning wood, the glow of orange light, the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He stumbled back outside, his face streaked with soot and sweat, and fell to his knees on the dirt. Behind him, the home that had been his refuge was now an inferno. Neighbors began to rush out from nearby houses, shouting his name, calling for help, but Cole barely heard them. His eyes locked onto something carved into the charred front door, a symbol, freshly painted in red before the fire spread, a serpent, coiled and striking. It wasn't random, it was a signature. The same Mafia that had threatened his father had made good on their warning, and they hadn't just come for money, they had come to send a message. Cole's body trembled, not with fear, but with a fury so deep it felt cold. He stood there as embers fell around him like dying stars, the flames reflecting in his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, the calm, quiet man began to fade, replaced by the soldier who had survived war zones, who had buried brothers, who had promised himself he would never fight again. The promise shattered that night. As the fire consumed the last of his home, Cole clenched his fists and made a silent vow. The peace he had built was over. Whatever monsters had done this would learn one truth. They had taken his family, but in doing so, they had awakened something far worse. The morning after the fire, the property was surrounded by flashing lights and murmuring voices. Police officers walked through the ashes, taking photos, whispering about a robbery gone wrong, but Cole barely listened. He sat on the hood of a patrol car, staring at the blackened remains of his home, his face blank, his eyes distant. When an officer asked him if he knew anyone who might want to harm his family, Cole simply shook his head. What could he say? That his father had been threatened by men who worked in shadows, that he could sense a professional hit when he saw one. They wouldn't believe him. They couldn't handle this kind of enemy. The police would file reports, search for clues, and eventually move on. But Cole knew better. The ones who did this didn't leave traces. They left warnings. And warnings like that didn't stop until someone made them stop. After the funeral, Cole vanished. No one saw him for 3 days. The neighbors assumed he went to stay with relatives. The police thought he was grieving, but those who knew how to read silence might have noticed something different. His truck was still parked at the burned property, and the lights in the old barn flickered on at night. Inside that barn, buried beneath years of dust and hay, was a secret no one in town knew existed. Cole had buried his past there the day he promised himself he would never kill again. Now, standing in the half-dark, his boots sinking into the dirt, he brushed away the dust until he felt metal under his fingers. He crouched down and unearthed a steel footlocker military issue, heavy and locked. When he lifted the lid, a gust of memory hit him like a wave. Inside were pieces of his old life, weapons wrapped in oiled cloth, encrypted radios, a knife engraved with coordinates, and at the bottom, a faded Delta Force patch. He stared at it for a long time, the dim light catching the rough fabric. For years, he had told himself that the man who once wore that patch was gone, that the war had ended inside him. But now, the war was back, and this time, it was personal. He ran his fingers over the weapons, checking each one with muscle memory he thought he had forgotten. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. There was no rage on his face, no, only focus. The man who once fixed cars and planted tomatoes was gone. The man who remained was a soldier, trained to disappear, to strike, and to end things quietly. As night fell again, Cole stood outside, the barn behind him, and the dark horizon ahead. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from the ruins. Somewhere out there, the men who killed his family were celebrating, unaware that they had woken something far beyond their understanding. Cole adjusted the strap on his rifle and whispered to himself, "You wanted a message? Now you'll get one." He didn't need backup, didn't need permission. The ghost of a forgotten war had returned, and this time, he was coming for them. The hunt began quietly, like a storm building beneath a calm sky. Cole left the ashes of his old life behind and slipped into the city like a shadow. He didn't draw attention. He didn't move fast. He watched, listened, and learned. The streets were darker than he remembered, full of eyes that saw too much and mouths that said too little. But Cole knew how to make people talk. He had done it before, in far worse places than this. He started with whispers, tracing the smallest thread-struck routes. Phone calls, faces that appeared in the same bars where quiet deals were made. He followed the serpent symbol wherever it led, and every night, the trail grew warmer. He didn't carry anger on his face. He carried purpose. To anyone passing by, he looked like another tired man walking home, but in his mind, every sound, every shadow, every word was part of a larger pattern. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into a blur of silent observation. He mapped their operations on old paper, marked drop points, and memorized faces. He found the first real lead in a rundown bar near the edge of the industrial district, a low-level enforcer named Ricky, who liked to talk after a few drinks. Cole waited until the man stumbled into the alley behind the bar, cigarette in hand, unaware of the ghost following him. A quick grab, a twist, and Ricky was pinned against the wall before he could scream. Cole's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You're going to tell me who gave the order?" he said. Ricky's breath came in short gasps, his hands trembling. "It wasn't personal," he stammered. "We were just sending a message." Cole leaned closer, his eyes cold, his grip steady. "Now I'm sending one back," he replied, his tone calm but final. He didn't need to hit him. The fear in his voice did the work. When Ricky finally broke and started talking, the puzzle began to make sense. The red serpent wasn't just a symbol, it was the mark of a small but vicious mafia group expanding into rural territories. They wanted control of everything: land, money, silence. When Cole's father refused their demands, they made an example out of him. Cole left Ricky alive but terrified, tied to his own steering wheel with the serpent's symbol carved into the car hood. By morning, word had spread through the underworld. Someone was coming for the serpent family. No one knew who, but they whispered about a man who moved like a ghost. A man who didn't kill but made others wish they were dead. Cole didn't rest. Each night he hunted, he became less of the man he used to be, and more of the weapon he once was. He didn't crave revenge for satisfaction. He sought it for justice. He didn't kill out of rage, but out of purpose. And as the city began to buzz with rumors of the Phantom Soldier, Cole felt something awaken inside him, a clarity, cold and sharp. The Serpent family had started a war they couldn't finish, and now, one man was coming to remind them that some debts are paid in silence, others in blood. Cole had always believed the attack on his family was about money, a cruel message from a gang desperate to control fear. But the deeper he dug, the more the truth began to twist into something darker, something personal. Each night, as he tracked the remaining members of the Serpent family, pieces of the past started falling into place. He broke into offices, hacked old databases, and found names that connected back to his father's old-school records. It didn't make sense at first. What could a retired teacher have done to anger a mafia family? But then, in a dusty community center, where his father used to volunteer, Cole found the answer. Hidden inside a metal filing cabinet was a folder, labeled Youth Outreach Fund, 1998. The reports inside showed his father had once exposed a fake education charity that had been stealing donations meant for underprivileged kids. The charity had been a front, one created by the same Mafia family now ruling the city's underground. His father had cost them millions. They hadn't forgotten. It wasn't about debt. It was revenge, years in the making. As Cole stood there in the dim light, the truth hit him like a knife to the gut. His father had spent his life teaching children to do the right thing, and it was that same goodness that had brought death to his door. The Mafia had come, not for money, but for silence. And now, Cole understood. He wasn't hunting criminals. He was hunting ghosts of a grudge buried decades ago. But those ghosts had flesh, faces, and fear, and he was coming for all of them. Word of his actions spread fast. The Serpent family, once feared across the city, began to crumble under paranoia. Enforcers disappeared, money vanished, and every safe house they owned turned up empty or burned. The men who once terrorized others now refused to leave their homes. They whispered about him like he was a myth, the ghost from the ashes. It was at their mansion on the edge of the city where Cole finally found the boss, Victor Cyrano, the man who ordered the fire. The guards outside were already gone, too afraid to stay. Cole walked through the front gates without resistance, the rain falling hard against his shoulders. Inside, the mansion was silent except for the creak of his boots on marble floors. Victor waited in his office, sitting behind a grand desk, a glass of whiskey shaking in his hand. He looked up when Cole entered, eyes wide with the realization that the nightmare standing before him was real. There were no words of anger, no shouting, only silence thick enough to drown in. Cole didn't need to threaten him. He simply placed his father's old-school file on the desk and stared. The look in his eyes carried the weight of everything that had been lost. Victor's hand trembled as he muttered excuses, but Cole didn't respond. "You remember him," Cole said quietly. "The teacher you destroyed." Then he turned to leave, his voice low and steady. "You built your empire on blood. Now it's time to see how much it costs." By the time Cole walked back into the rain, the boss was weeping, and the Serpent's power was finished. When the last man from the Serpent family disappeared, the city began to breathe again. The police called it a series of mysterious vigilante strikes. The media called it justice without law. But Cole didn't care what anyone called it. He didn't stay for the reports, didn't give interviews, and didn't seek revenge any longer. His mission had ended the moment he made sure no one else would suffer like his parents did. One night, under a heavy gray sky, he walked back to the land where his home once stood. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, even though months had passed. The grass had begun to grow again, and the soil, though scarred, was alive. Cole stood there quietly, his coat brushing against the wind, looking at the empty space where his house used to be. In his hand, he held a folded letter, the last piece of his story. He left it on the porch step of his new neighbor's house, knowing it would eventually be found. The note was short, handwritten in his neat, military script. "Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the courage to protect it." He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. Weeks later, construction began on that same property. Workers found the remains of the old foundation and built a new house over it, smaller but brighter. Every night, its porch light glowed, not as a beacon of fear, but of memory. People said the light never went out, not even during storms. Neighbors began to notice something else too. Around dusk, when the sun slipped behind the trees and the fields turned golden, a tall figure could sometimes be seen standing near the fence line. He never came close enough to talk, never entered the house. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the horizon in silence before disappearing into the night. Some said it was a veteran who lost his family. Some whispered that it was the ghost of the man who once lived there. But those who looked closely would swear they saw something human in his stillness, not sorrow. But Peace. Cole didn't think of himself as a hero or a ghost. The world called him both, but to him, those words meant nothing. He had kept his promise, the one he made when he buried his parents. He had protected what peace truly meant, not by running from his past, but by accepting it. He had become what he needed to be, not for vengeance, but for closure. Somewhere far from the city, in a quiet cabin near the woods, he fixed cars again, tended a garden, and tried to live simply. He still woke at dawn, still watched the sunrise like it was the first light after a long night. The war inside him had finally gone quiet, replaced by something softer, gratitude. To the world, he was a legend. To himself, just a son who had rewritten his promise, and as long as the porch light glowed on that rebuilt house, his story and his peace would live on.